I don't even know if I'm looking for advice or just need to vent, but here we go. I'm Jake. I'm 27, and for the past few years, I've been working as a full-time streamer. It's not something I talk about with my family, not because I'm ashamed, but because they just don't get it. And honestly, I prefer it that way. But here's the thing. I make good money, more than enough to live comfortably, invest, and, up until recently, support my family when they needed it. Growing up, we weren't exactly poor, but we were always on that edge. The kind of family where the electric bill was sometimes a little late, where we never went hungry, but I learned early on not to ask for things unless they were absolutely necessary. My dad, Tom, worked an average office job and hated every second of it. He'd complain about how real jobs don't pay enough, about how the system is rigged, about how people like us never get ahead. Meanwhile, my mom, Mary, was a stay-at-home parent, sweet but passive, the kind of person who spent her whole life trying to keep the peace, even if it meant ignoring the obvious. And then there's my younger sister, Lauren. She's still figuring life out. Bounced between jobs, moved out a couple of years ago, but still needed help with rent more often than not. I never minded helping them. They were my family. That's what you do, right? At least, that's what I thought. Then last weekend happened. Mom had insisted on a family game night. We didn't do them often, but every once in a while, she'd guilt-trip me into coming over for some quality time. I figured it'd be a few rounds of Uno, some lighthearted teasing, maybe a home-cooked meal if I was lucky. Instead, it turned into a roast session at my expense. It started small. Tom made some comment about how I sleep all day, which, for the record, I don't. I just work late. Lauren chimed in, joking that I never really grew up. Mom sighed dramatically about how I used to have such big dreams, as if I were some kind of disappointment. I tried to brush it off. I'd heard it all before. But what I didn't know was that Lauren was secretly recording parts of the night on her phone. 2 days later, I was scrolling Instagram when I saw a notification. Lauren had posted a story. I tapped on it without thinking. The first clip was shaky, but I could still see my dad, leaning back in his chair, drink in hand, smirking. I swear, Jake has the easiest life on earth, he said, laughing. Plays his little games, talks to nerds all day, and somehow pays rent. He could be homeless in a year and wouldn't even see it coming. Laughter. His. Lauren's. Even my mom's. I swiped to the next clip. More of the same. Tom went on about how I think I'm some kind of businessman. Mom joked that I should actually use that computer science degree and get a real job. And then, the last clip. Lauren turned the camera on herself, grinning. This is why he never brings a girlfriend home, she whispered, giggling. I just sat there, staring at my phone. I knew they didn't take my job seriously. I knew they thought I was wasting my life. But seeing them say it, hearing them laugh about it when they thought I wasn't listening, that hit different. For years, I've been helping them. I covered bills when they were struggling. I paid off Mom's medical expenses when she needed surgery last year. I even spotted Lauren rent money when she was short. And here they were, laughing at me like I was some pathetic loser they had to tolerate. I closed Instagram, set my phone down, just sat there, staring at the wall. And then, for the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was time to stop helping them. At first, I tried to make excuses for them. Maybe they were just joking. Maybe I was overreacting. But the longer I thought about it, the more I realized. No, this wasn't just one offhand joke. This wasn't some harmless teasing between family members. This was contempt. I opened my banking app, scrolled through my recent transactions. $1,500, rent money for my parents' house. $600, the last chunk of Lauren's car payment. $3,200, a credit card bill Dad had forgotten to pay. $250, groceries from when Mom called last month, saying they were short. Line after line. A quiet, damning list of all the ways I'd been supporting them. And for what? I took a deep breath. Then another. And finally, I did something I should have done a long time ago. I opened our family group chat and typed, "Hey, just saw Lauren's video. Didn't realize you all thought so little of me." The 3 little dots popped up almost instantly. Mom typing. Then they vanished. Lauren started. Then stopped. Finally, Tom replied, "Oh, you saw that? Come on, don't be so sensitive. We were just joking around." Joking. Before I could respond, Lauren chimed in. "Yeah, it wasn't serious, LOL. You know how Dad gets after a few drinks." I clenched my jaw. Funny. It wasn't a joke when you needed money for rent last month. A longer pause this time. Then, dude, seriously? You're mad over a stupid video? I exhaled slowly. This wasn't just about the video. This was about years of disrespect. Years of being treated like a joke while I was the one making sure they could keep the lights on. So I typed one last message. I'll make this simple. If you think my job is so embarrassing, you won't have to worry about it anymore. Don't ask me for another cent. Before they could respond, I muted the chat. For the first time in years, I felt something like relief. Of course, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because if I knew anything about my dad, it was that he never handled losing control well. And I had just taken away his favorite safety net. The first few hours after I muted the chat were quiet. Too quiet. No calls. No messages. No frantic attempts to backpedal. For a brief, stupid moment, I almost thought, maybe they got the message. Maybe they finally understood. Then, around 9 p.m., my phone lit up. Dad calling. I let it ring. A minute later, a text. Pick up the damn phone. Then another. Don't act like a child over a joke. And another. You really think you're going to cut us off over this? Grow up, Jake. I stared at the screen, jaw clenched. There it was. That familiar tone. That mix of anger and entitlement. Like he was owed a conversation. Like I was the one being unreasonable. I ignored him. 2 minutes later, Lauren texted. Dude, you're being so dramatic. Dad's pissed. Just talk to him. It wasn't even that serious. I didn't respond. Then Mom. Jake, honey, please don't do this. You know your father didn't mean any harm. I sighed. That one stung more than it should have. Not because I believed her, but because of how automatic it was. She always did this. Minimized his behavior. Smoothed things over just enough to keep the peace. I could practically hear her voice in my head. That tired, exasperated sigh she always used whenever I dared to push back. Underscore, you know how he is, Jake. Just let it go. Underscore. But I was done letting it go. I was done playing along. So I put my phone on Do Not Disturb, shut my laptop, and went live. It was a good stream, too. Solid numbers, great engagement, even a few big donations from regulars. And the whole time, one thought kept running through my head. This is my real life. Not them. This. I should have felt free. And in a way, I did. But I also knew my dad. And I knew he wasn't going to let this go. I crashed around 3 a.m., exhausted. Slept like a rock. When I woke up the next morning, the first thing I saw was my phone screen, flooded with notifications. 16 missed calls. 8 from Dad. 4 from Mom. 2 from Lauren. 2 from an unknown number. And then, at the very top, the one notification that made my stomach drop. My bank app. I tapped it open, already dreading what I'd see. $600 withdrawal. $150 withdrawal. $350 withdrawal. I stared at the screen, my brain taking a second to process before the realization hit me like a freight train. They took money from me. More specifically, my parents had just drained our joint emergency savings account. The one I had set up years ago. The one I created back when they were struggling. When I still thought I could trust them. When I was naive enough to believe that helping them would make them appreciate me. I barely used it now. It was just a backup. A safety net. And they were emptying it. My hands were shaking as I yanked my phone off the charger and immediately called my bank. Yeah, I need to remove someone from my account, I said, barely able to keep my voice steady. The customer service rep greeted me, started asking for security details, confirming my identity, all that standard stuff, but I could barely focus. My mind was racing, a mix of anger and disbelief crashing over me in waves. They really thought they could do this. They really thought they could steal from me and I'd just take it. While the rep worked, I pulled up our family group chat. Without bothering to read any of the dozens of unread messages, I sent one final text. You just stole from me. I'm done. Then I blocked all of them. No more arguments. No more justifications. No more excuses. I was done. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Because people like my dad, they don't just walk away when you take away their control. And sure enough, later that afternoon, I heard it. A loud, angry knock at my door. Not the casual kind. Not someone dropping by for a visit. This was insistent. Demanding. I already knew who it was before I even checked. But still, I looked through the peephole anyway, just to confirm. And there he was. My father. Standing on my doorstep. Jaw clenched. Face red. Fist practically trembling at his sides. He didn't just look angry. He looked furious. I stood there, staring through the peephole, my breath slow and controlled. I wasn't scared, at least, not in the way he wanted me to be. But something about the way he stood there, fists clenched at his sides, his whole body practically vibrating with anger, made my blood run cold. Another knock, harder this time. "Jake, open the damn door." His voice was sharp, clipped, a tone I'd heard my entire life, a tone that always expected to be obeyed. I didn't move. He pounded again. "I know you're in there. Don't make me stand out here all night." I exhaled slowly. My first instinct was to ignore him, let him rage outside until he got bored and left. But I knew my dad. That wasn't going to happen. If I didn't open the door, he'd escalate. He'd make a scene. He'd make sure my neighbors heard. So I unlocked the door. The second I cracked it open, he shoved his way inside. I barely had time to step back before he was already in my living room, standing there like he owned the place. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he demanded, his voice low but seething. His hands were still balled into fists, his whole posture tense, like he was barely holding himself back. I let out a sharp laugh. "Me? You stole from me, Dad. Don't act surprised that I'm cutting you off." His face twisted into something ugly, a sneer curling at his lips. "Stole from you?" he scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. That money was for the family." I felt my fingers tighten into a fist at my side. That was my money, that I earned, that I chose to share with you because I thought you actually needed it. But I'm done. I'm not your damn ATM. I'm not paying your bills. I'm not bailing you out anymore. He shook his head, laughing under his breath like I was some stupid kid throwing a tantrum. "So that's it," he said. "You're just going to turn your back on us?" Something in me snapped. "You turned your back on me," I shot back, my voice rising. "You, Lauren, Mama, you all sat there and laughed at me. You mocked me, humiliated me. And now that you're losing my money, now you suddenly care." He rolled his eyes, letting out an exasperated sigh like I was the one being ridiculous. "Jesus, Jake. It was a joke. You're really going to throw a fit over that?" I couldn't help but laugh, sharp, bitter, incredulous. "A joke?" I shook my head. "Funny how it's always a joke when it suits you. But it wasn't a joke when you were taking my money. It wasn't a joke when you needed me to keep the lights on. Funny how you never had a problem with my embarrassing career when it was paying your damn rent. That was when something changed." His expression flickered, just for a second, just long enough for me to see it. Uncertainty. A crack in his armor. Like, for the first time, it was actually sinking in. But then, just as quickly, the anger was back. He stepped closer, jabbing a finger into my chest. "You wouldn't have that money if it weren't for us," he spat. "We raised you. We supported you. You wouldn't be anywhere if we hadn't busted our asses putting food on the table for you." I let out a slow breath, shook my head. "And I paid you back. 100 times over. I took care of you. I covered your bills. I gave you everything I could. And it was never enough for you." I locked eyes with him, my voice turning ice cold. "But I'm done. You don't get to insult me, steal from me, and then waltz in here acting like I owe you something." For the first time since he barged in, he didn't have a response. He just stood there, breathing hard, face twisted in rage. But I could see something else beneath it. Realization. Because deep down, I think he finally knew. I wasn't bluffing. Then, just when I thought he might actually leave, his lips curled into a smirk. "You think you're so damn successful, huh?" His tone was mocking now, dripping with condescension. "Think you're some big-shot internet star?" I didn't say anything, just crossed my arms and waited. He let out a short, bitter laugh. "You think this streaming thing is going to last forever? You think you're set for life? Let me tell you something, kid, you're nothing. You're a joke. You think these people watching you online actually care about you? The second you stop being entertaining, the second some younger, better streamer comes along." He spread his arms wide, giving me that patronizing, self-satisfied grin that used to make my stomach churn as a kid. "You'll be forgotten. And when that happens..." He took a step back, gesturing around my apartment like it was all temporary. "You'll come crawling back. Just like I knew you would." I just stared at him for a long moment. He really believed that. He needed to believe that. Because the alternative, that I was actually better off without them, was something his ego couldn't handle. So I smiled. A slow, knowing smile that made his smirk falter, just slightly. "You really think that, huh?" I said, my voice almost amused. "You really think I need you?" I took a step closer, looking him dead in the eye. "You have no idea how much money I make." And that was when I saw it. That flicker of something in his expression. Greed. Curiosity. Doubt. For the first time, he actually thought about it. And that was when I knew he wasn't here to argue. He wasn't here to make me feel guilty. He was here because he thought he could still win. But he was about to learn. He had already lost. For the first time in my life, I saw it. Hesitation. For just a second, my dad looked like he wasn't sure. Like something in his head was shifting, trying to work out if maybe, just maybe, he had miscalculated. I let the silence stretch between us, watching him grind his teeth, his jaw clenching and unclenching as if trying to chew down whatever thought had just crossed his mind. But then, just as quickly as it came, that flicker of doubt disappeared, buried under something uglier. He scoffed, shaking his head like I was some dumb kid who didn't know any better. You think you're too good for us now? His voice had lost some of its bite, but he was still clinging to control, still grasping for the upper hand. You think just because you got lucky playing video games on the internet, you don't need your family anymore? I sighed, rubbing the bridge of my nose. You don't get it, I muttered. I looked up at him, gesturing around my apartment. This isn't about money, Dad. It's about respect. His face twitched, but I didn't stop. I worked my ass off for this. And instead of being happy for me, instead of being proud of me, you sat there and laughed. His eyes flickered for half a second. You treated me like a joke. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. But I'm the one laughing now. His expression darkened. You think you'll be laughing when this all falls apart? Because it will fall apart. And when it does, don't come crying to us. I tilted my head, studying him. That's funny, I said, because I was about to say the same thing to you. He let out a sharp breath, but I saw it, the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. I crossed my arms, letting the silence weigh down on him before I finally spoke again. You need me, not the other way around. His face turned red. He opened his mouth, probably to spit out another insult, but then his phone buzzed. I watched his jaw tighten as he pulled it out, glancing at the screen. And I smirked. That Mom? I asked, asking if you got me to change my mind? He gripped his phone tighter, but didn't say anything. Bingo. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. Let me guess, I said. Since I cut you off, the bills are stacking up. You've got debts. Maybe Mom's been hounding you because suddenly there's no money coming in to save her from herself. Maybe Lauren's panicking because she lost her safety net. His breathing was heavier now. His fists clenched at his sides. But he had nothing to say, because he knew I was right. I took a slow step forward and nodded toward the door. Get out. He didn't move. Just stood there, staring at me like he couldn't quite believe this was happening. Like he still thought there was a way to turn this around. You're making a mistake, Jake, he finally said, his voice low. Family is all you've got. I held his gaze, unblinking. That's where you're wrong. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of him. I wasn't seeking his approval. I didn't care what he thought. And that scared him more than anything. He lingered for a few seconds longer, maybe hoping I'd crack. Maybe waiting for some last-minute guilt trip to land. But I just stood there, waiting. And finally, he turned and walked out. I shut the door behind him, locked it. Then I took a deep breath. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't even sad. I just felt free. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. No more guilt. No more obligations. No more bending over backward for people who never cared about me in the first place. It was over. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. The days after my dad walked out of my apartment felt different, quieter. Not the kind of quiet that made me anxious, waiting for the next call, the next argument, the next demand. This was the kind of quiet I hadn't realized I'd been craving for years. I kept waiting for something, a last-ditch attempt, some dramatic apology, a sudden change of heart. But none of that came. Instead, the silence stretched on. No calls. No texts. No desperate attempts to guilt-trip me back into their lives. And for a while, I thought that was it. That maybe, finally, they had let me go. Then Lauren texted. Can we talk? Just that. No hey. No how are you? Nothing. I almost ignored it. Almost blocked her like I did the rest of them. But something made me pause. I stared at the message for a long time, debating. Then, finally, I replied. About what? The response came almost immediately. Not over text. Can we meet? Just us. I sighed, rubbing my temple. Part of me knew what this was. She wasn't reaching out because she suddenly had some moral revelation. She was reaching out because shit was finally hitting the fan. But I agreed anyway. We met at a small coffee shop downtown. Neutral ground. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in the corner, fidgeting with her phone. She looked up as I walked in, And for the first time in a long time, she looked nervous. Not defensive. Not smug. Just nervous. I slid into the seat across from her. All right, I said, crossing my arms. What do you want? She exhaled, setting her phone down. I messed up. I raised an eyebrow. You'll have to be more specific. She flinched but nodded. The video. Posting it. I thought. She swallowed. I don't know. I thought it was funny. I didn't think you'd see it, and I definitely didn't think you'd take it that seriously. I let out a sharp laugh. Right. Because watching my own family mock me behind my back is hilarious. I know, she said quickly. I know. It was shitty. And I'm sorry. I studied her for a moment. She looked uncomfortable. Uncertain. Like she actually meant it. But I wasn't about to make this easy for her. So why now? I asked. Why the sudden change of heart? She hesitated. Then, finally, because everything's falling apart, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. I sat back. Ah, there it is. She looked away, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. Dad thought you'd cave by now, she said. Thought you'd come crawling back, begging to make things right. But instead, she exhaled. Instead, he's the one who's desperate. I didn't say anything. Just let her keep talking. Mom's freaking out, she continued. Bills are stacking up, and without your money, things are bad. I gave a slow nod. And let me guess, you're here because you want me to fix it? She shook her head quickly. No. I mean, she ran a hand through her hair. I don't know. I guess I needed you to know that I get it now. I narrowed my eyes. Do you, though? She swallowed hard. I didn't think about it before. How much you were actually helping. How much Dad relied on you, even while he was shitting on you. She let out a bitter laugh. I let him get in my head. He always talks about you like you're some joke. Like your job isn't real. And I guess. I started believing it, too. I let her words sink in. It would have been so easy to just accept the apology. To let her back in. But I wasn't the same person I was a week ago. So what do you want from me, Lauren? I asked. She hesitated. I don't want us to hate each other. I stared at her for a long moment. Then I exhaled. I don't hate you, I said. I just don't trust you. Her shoulders sagged, but she nodded. I get that. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. You want a relationship with me? You want me to believe you've changed? I tilted my head. Then prove it. She swallowed. How? Start by owning up to what you did, I said. All of it. You let Dad use you to humiliate me. You laughed at me. You let him steal from me. She flinched. I didn't know about that part. Did you really not? She opened her mouth, closed it, then sighed. I should have seen it coming. I nodded. Yeah, you should have. She sat there, silent for a moment. Then, I'll pay you back, she said. For the money you gave me. Every cent. I raised an eyebrow. That's a start. She looked up at me, hesitating. And Dad? I scoffed. Dad made his choice. Her face fell, but she didn't argue. We sat there in silence for a few more moments. Then, finally, I stood up. I have to go, I said. She looked up at me. Jake. I shook my head. I'm not saying things can never change between us. But you have to be the one to change. Not just for today. Not just because things got hard. I met her gaze. But because you actually want to be better. She swallowed, then nodded. I turned to leave. And for the first time in my life, I walked away without looking back.